I know you're focused on upstream in your day to day, but could you tell us what your job role is and maybe a bit about what you do?
Yeah, so my title would be drilling engineer, and essentially what we do as drilling engineers is we plan and execute the drilling of our wells. So in the earliest phases, what that looks like is getting any kind of offset data that we can get, whether that's mud reports, mud logs, casing designs through like a public database like Drilling Info or Enverus, and then beyond that, we read as many drilling reports that we can. And so essentially what you're trying to do is just highlight, hey, where are the problem intervals? Where are things really challenging at? And by that, I would mean like lost zones or areas that are maybe unstable with certain types of fluids and all that. We also, work with geology a lot of time to pick casing seats. Where do we need to put the end of our casing before we could continue drilling? All those different things go into play. Once you've got a well planned and you've run economics on it and all those different things, you really get to the execution phase. And what that is whenever the rig shows up on location. So at that point, you're working with your consultants on location. Some companies also run superintendents out in the field who assist with kind of watching over multiple wells. But at that point, really what you're just trying to do is implement your plan. You're constantly watching your EDRs, which is electronic data recorders. That's TOTCO, PASON, just seeing what's going on with the rig. You're also talking to your consultants, your superintendents, all those different people as well, just coordinating to make sure that you're getting things done as efficiently and safely as possible. And so that's really, I mean, from the start of the well to normally at the very end, we'll, run casing, cement the well bore, and then at that point, we're done with it and we hand it off to completions.
Okay. So a question that I'd have on that then is, as a drilling engineer, like you get hired by the operator, I'd imagine, and are you guys involved in vetting any other companies that are coming to work on site? So like, are you guys hiring the companies that are doing the actual work, or is that still fall on the operator?
No, yeah, definitely. I mean, a lot of times the drilling engineer works for the operator, right? They're employed by the operator, but sometimes they're also 1099, contract. And so, yes, you can bring value to the project in a lot of different ways. And one of those is through kind of knowing the technology that's available out there and who's doing what and who's doing well. And so a lot of times you will. Now, I would say if you're 1099 in contract, at the end of the day, the people paying the bills, the operator get to make the final decision in regards to who's being used and exactly what they're doing. But yeah, I mean, being a part of the vendor selection process is extremely important.
You've been doing this for over 20 years, right? Somewhere in there?
Yeah, going well right at 20 years now. So 2026 will be 20 years exactly. I started in June of 2006.
Okay. In that time frame, I'm sure you've seen obviously a lot of ups and downs. We've talked about the economy at length. I mean, those are some of our earliest conversations were just about, WTI and all that fun stuff that, as we were kind of going through the beginning of this year. But I guess focusing on the relationship side of it, I'm sure you've built a lot of relationships with a lot of oil field service companies, especially in Oklahoma, and I'm sure across the board. But are you choosing to work with certain companies more often just because of those relationships, or are there new players that come on the scene that are kind of vying for your attention?
I would say there's always, new technologies or new companies that are getting out there and wanting to meet and discuss what they're doing and why it's different and why it's better. So you've always got to be open to that. You do have people that you've worked with or people that you trust that you definitely want to go with. But I would also say at the end of the day, I think economics really should run the show in most cases. What's the absolute best for the well, kind of independent of those, whatever those relationships would be. But saying all that, if all else is equal, I'll always go with the person who I've worked with before, who I really knows their stuff, because there's just so much to know in the oil field. Just even in a specific category like drilling, that it's almost impossible to know it all. And so you've really got to accumulate those people and surround yourself with those people who are what I would consider subject matter experts, whether that be cementing or casing or mud. Those people can also be an invaluable resource whenever you're fighting issues.
If you want to be an engineering consultant like you're in right now,
Right.
what are some of the first steps you took 20 years ago, or what would you do different today to kind of evolve into what you're doing today?
Number one, I'd say, yeah, you've got to get an engineering degree. So, the first time I went to school, I graduated, I got a master's in microbiology, and I was geosteering and doing some other stuff, working out in the field and all that. And one of the companies that I was working with, in energy, they said, "Hey, why don't you come to lunch with us?" And I was pretty excited. I'd always wanted to move over to an operator, and I felt like they were going to offer me a job. And they really asked me two questions. They said, they took me out to lunch. There was about 6 or 8 of them, and they asked me. They said, "Do you want to geosteer the rest of your life?" And I said, "No, I really don't want to do that for the rest of my career." And they said, "Okay, well, do you want to go out and maybe be a consultant, like on the rigs?" And I was like, "No, I really like being home at night, and I've spent a couple years out in the field, and I just want to be home at night." And they said, "Okay, well, then you need to go back and get an engineering degree if you want to be an engineer." And so at that point, I went back to school, spent another 5 or 6 years, 5.5 years, something like that, getting a chemical engineering degree that would allow me to be. I didn't know at the time. I didn't know if it was going to be a drilling engineer, production engineer, completions, whatever it was. But I wouldn't say that that's a glass ceiling. I would say in most companies that's a very defined, like, just to open the door, you've got to have an engineering degree. Now beyond that, say that you get your engineering degree, summer internships are vital. You're going out, getting to know people, expanding your network. Whenever you graduate, I would say I don't know that there's a number to it, but I know tons of people who are offered jobs from places where they interned at. That internship was essentially just a long job interview. Now it's also extremely competitive. What I've seen from other people is if your GPA isn't really high, then a lot of times you're not going to get your first choice of operator, and you may go do some work with a service company. But there's a lot of benefits. I spent years at Baker Hughes, and it was a huge benefit to me because I got to spend a lot more time out in the field, I think, than a lot of the current engineers do. If you go straight from school into an operator and you're not spending a whole lot of time in the field, then there's just so much that you just don't know. And I mean, I spent time in the field and there's still just tons and tons that I don't know. And so, I think that's a kind of a vital part of becoming an engineer is spending some time out there and understanding what goes on a location.
Similar for me, like I spent 15 years in my last career before, moving into something else. And it had a huge impact on, I think, the direction and kind of where my head's at every day
Right.
going into this, right? And even growing up, right? I mean, digging ditches and all that and go through clay soil and stuff kind of defined everything. But the question that I would ask is surrounding that would be, do you think that spending time in the field before you went and got your degree for a certain number of years kind of helped you either be motivated to go get that degree or maybe gave you a clearer sense of direction instead of just, finishing high school, going straight to college and getting that degree right off the bat?
I would say it did. I mean, I'll say number one, like the Chem E degree that I got, it was an extremely challenging program. It was one of the toughest things I've ever done. And at times you want to quit, but I had left a job at Baker Hughes that I actually really enjoyed to get this this spot over at Lynn, and I knew if I did not get this engineering degree that it was not going. They weren't going to hire me as an engineer, and so I just knew I had to push through it and do whatever it took to get that degree. And it was a challenging time. It was 5.5 years of school. I had to go back and retake a lot of classes I had taken before because they weren't specifically for engineers. My youngest kid was born during the second semester of my junior year, and so it was tough on the whole family, but at the end of it, it was 100% worth it, and I've loved it ever since. So, yeah, what you've got to do is find what motivates you. I mean, there's going to be late nights, there's going to be sacrifice. The same thing going on in school that happens out in the field. Now it's a lot different. You're not out there studying in 120-degree heat like guys that are working out on the floor are, but at the same time, it's no less important that you finish it and do well.